Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome back. It's Friday. Yay, Friday. Friday is a good day. Friday is a good day. Actually, I think most people think, well, I mean, for a lot, let's try again. Yeah, it's, yeah. So Friday is a good day because of this. Because I'm teaching tonight on plant communication, which is exciting. And also Fridays, I have kind of a little bit more of a leisurely schedule that gives me the opportunity to just go through things that I did over the week and to prepare for some of the newer pieces that are coming online. So it's just a good day all around. Anyway, welcome back. And for those that don't know me, it's me, Tigria Gardenia. I am a nature-inspired mentor and leadership coach, or really certified life coach. And we're going to talk a little bit about plant consciousness stuff. How's your week been? I'm so curious as to how things are going. How has it been? It seems like there's just so many moving parts. I feel like every time I open something on my computer, like a social media page, I'm just flabbergasted. Sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a not so good way, as to exactly what's happening around the world. It's definitely something to get me to just get us all thinking. My next podcast episode is going to be really interesting. It's all about this. So I'm looking forward to actually sharing that with you. Purslane and I had a big chat. This week's podcast episode is about my relationship with Purslane and as a spirit wild plant. And on Sunday, Purslane and I sat and we did some art and we relaxed together and got to really connect, which had been a while since I had taken that time. So it has been, and that really helped set up the week. It was a beautiful week to happen. So anyway, today we have, I have actually two papers queued up. They're actually really, neither of them is really a paper, kind of. It's a hard thing to describe. So the first one in particular is kind of weird, but it's weird in a good way. Or actually, that's not true. It's weird in a crap way. And I'll explain what I mean. In the sense that, so back in 2021, I believe it was October of 2021, there was a conference called Green Intelligence ? Debating Plant Cognition. So this was held in Switzerland. Unfortunately, I heard about it a little bit too late, but it was all around plant cognition. So you had people like Paco Calvo, who was there, who we've talked about multiple times. You had some other interesting characters. That was not a very good choice of words. Sorry about that. That just kind of came out. So the overall program was unmasking plant intelligence and what that really means. And it was about not all sensory systems are information channels. We had plant affordances. What could cognition be if not human cognition? So it feels like, reading through what were the titles of this conference, that they were trying to be really make it a debate. In other words, to have kind of an actual debate between the two from the titles. So you had things like rainbow intelligence, looking beyond animals and plants. And then you had plant sense, but only animals perceive, for example. So it was, it wasn't just a whole plants are amazing. It was an actual debate topic. And in there was a presentation hosted by Mark Artiga from Spain, who I believe is part of the Minimal Intelligence lab, which is Paco Calvo's lab, I believe. Don't quote me on that. And he gave a presentation called Communication and Deception in Plants. Now, I was not there. And I've looked all around and could not find an actual like transcript or a video of this particular presentation. So this, we can only go on, you know, what we know so far and what we get. But what happened was that there was a commentator that was part of each one of the presentations, had like a commentator. I don't understand what the commentator role is because it doesn't say it. All I have is kind of an outline of the agenda. And so the commentator was somebody by the name of Adrian Wieczorek, and he's a German from Munich. And I guess something about this triggered him. So I think looking at the titles and looking at them, you had the person who presents, who is kind of pro-plant, and then you had a commentator, which seems to be the person that gives kind of the other point of view, but that's just a guess based on what I'm seeing. So this Adrian Wieczorek actually presented a paper of his own, or a comment piece, or a manuscript. We don't even know exactly what it is because I found it in one. It was, I think, remember I said they call him a commentator. It says presented at the conference Green Intelligence in Switzerland. So I think that this was like the rebuttal. So remember, this is called a debate. So I think what happened was that Mark Artiga presented his perception, which is communication and deception in plants, like how this is communicating and such. And then Adrian Wieczorek presented his, maybe it's a rebuttal. So I found the rebuttal, and it's called Why Deceived Systems Do Not Need to Be Cognitive. So we're going to go through this because we have gone through all of the papers connected to plant consciousness and how, and even the rebuttals to plant consciousness, right? The whole, why would we even think of plants as conscious? Consciousness requires the brain, the whole 9 yards. So if you go back through all of these plant consciousness commentaries, which you can find, actually, I never did that. Hold on a second. I'm going to do this. I'm going to create a banner that talks about where you can find. I mean, you can find them on YouTube if you're watching this on YouTube, but if you want it with the full, yeah, hold on. Let's see how that works. Does that work? Hey, there you go. So I recently was able to go back and grab all the old files and put them on to, like, with their descriptions, and create show notes and put them all onto my website. So if you go here to tigreagardenia.com/commentary, you will find all of the papers starting from the very beginning. Now, many of them, the videos are hosted in the Naturally Conscious community, especially in the early days. Then we moved over to YouTube. Some of them are actually hosted in both. And then from one point on, I did them in both, where you will find, you know, the live here in YouTube, and then you can head over to the Naturally Conscious community to catch the replay. And of course, the Naturally Conscious community is the place where you're going to have all of, you know, your discussion on these topics and everything. But if you go to this website, if you go to my website, you can find the commentary, and there you will see what the latest goings on is. So the reason I say this is because this will all make even more sense than whatever it is that I'm about to say when you read the commentary. I mean, when you go back through the old ones, because remember, we have gone through this entire debate discussion for so long around plant consciousness and around plant cognition and around intelligence and all these different aspects. So that being said, let's just dive into this paper, because I think that until we get into it, we're not going to, again, it's not a paper. I think this is his rebuttal. So until we really get into this conversation, we won't know what the hell we're dealing with. So let's just get into it. So remember, this is a manuscript. Do not quote from it, because this is the way he presented it, but he published it. So if he published it, we're going to read it. So, introduction. Thanks to Mark Artiga for his thought-provoking talk, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to make a modest contribution. Remember, I said that the way that this conference went is the fact that you had the person who gave the speech or the talk or the original point, in this case, Mark Artiga, who gave one on communication and deception in plants. And then it looks like you had a rebuttal. And this is his rebuttal. This is Adrian W's, like Wieczorek. Hopefully I'm saying that right, but let's just call him Adrian for right now. And this is his rebuttal. So I think that the indirect strategy Artiga pursues is quite fruitful, especially regarding deception, because apparent failures in general are illuminating phenomenon of what a system normally does or can do. To put it in a Heideggerian fashion, when a tool stops working, the tool itself and its properties suddenly come to the fore. The same with language when we are left speechless. Humans try to learn and to get to know our own and other minds from mistakes and disillusions. But unfortunately, as we know, this cold light often shines only for a moment. In this respect, I agree that deception can also be elucidating of what plants can do and what they cannot. I want to go into two major elements of Artiga's account of deception in the tomato case. One, the functional dimension of deception, and most important, the suggestion that the failure we find here is primarily a cognitive function failure. Now, remember, this whole conference is about the fact of cognition, right? It's not necessarily consciousness. The conference is specifically debating plant cognition. Now, we've gone through cognition with many papers, including Monica Galeano's, who was one of the people who really brought to the forefront this idea that plants can be cognitive beings. So cognition is even as controversial, and in some ways more controversial, because consciousness just sort of gives a radical split where, plants are or plants are not. Cognition elicits a lot more of debate in the context of we don't have enough testing to be able to understand it. In other words, the models that test consciousness, which really don't exist. Therefore, you can only sort of put definitions around the word consciousness and then see whether or not, in your opinion, plants fall into this category. When instead we're talking about cognition, there has been historically a series of ways that we test for cognition and rate of cognition and ability and how cognizant are you and such like that. But they're all based on models connected to animal behavior, human and animal behavior. Therefore, Monica Galeano was one of the first to really point this out and say, hey, we can't even start to talk about plant cognition because our entire model, the way that we test for cognition, requires behaviors that are connected to the human or the animal body. In other words, it's based on reactions that can't be mimicked by plants because plants physiologically are different. Therefore, we need to look and reinterpret the meaning of these responses and discover what are the appropriate responses a plant gives that shows cognition. So this is where the whole discussion on plant cognition is actually broader in some ways than consciousness, because cognition requires us to create an entirely new methodology, an entirely new way of testing before we can even get to the test that will show whether or not plants are cognizant. And in the building of these tests, there is the fear by those that do not want to think of plants as cognizant or as cognitive and having a cognitive nature, that you are building in inherent biases. Now, Galeano was very open in her book, Thus Spoke the Plant, about the fact that the way she ended up getting to the actual methodology of the test, the systems of the test, was based on, for her, a form of plant communication, where it was the plant that helped her realize, hey, if you use that human definition, that animal methodology, you're never going to get any kind of answers. You need to think like a plant. Hence why the book is called Thus Spoke the Plant, right? You need to think plant-like, and then from thinking plant-like, you can devise testing. But remember, that if you are a human neurobiologist or a plant biologist who believes that plants are inert or just, living to the part, Aristotelian type thought processes, then how do you ever think about a methodology with the mind of a plant in, you just can't get there. So this is a really big debate. It's actually a hard debate to have because of that. And so I'm sad that they don't actually publish these presentations because I would have loved to hear them. I think that they could have been extremely interesting and illuminating to give us a better understanding of where the debate has gone. So I'm glad that we at least have this. Oh no, sorry, I actually accidentally took that off. That was my fault. Okay, so that being said, let's go farther into this. Oh, not that far. Okay, so the functionality of deception. Artiga stresses quite rightly that deception is not accidental and not only the factual cause of error. Deception functionally exploits misleading causes. Something is supposed to make a consumer to get things wrong. So it sounds like Artiga was basically stating that the fact that plants express deception, to think of an example is like the way that orchids, mimic the shape of a different of a pollinator in order to encourage them to come over and try to copulate with them, or other forms of deception where the plants mimic something that they know will deceive another organism. It sounds like Artiga is trying to say this shows that they're cognizant because they are making this choice to deceive someone else, and therefore they have cognitive functions. But it sounds like we'll see where this Adrian guy is trying to take us. Otherwise, any cause of error would be deceiving, which would denote a use of the word only in metaphorical sense. I was deceived by a shadow. With such functional error causing being sufficient, Artiga also makes clear that deceiving does not, as one might think, need to imply intentions or a theory of mind. Now, this is probably, I haven't read this, right? We're reading this together, but I have a feeling that this is probably a big part of this because this is exactly part of the discussion, right? If I have mind, then my deception is intentional. I can set intention because I have a mind. If I don't have a mind, my deception is just a cause and effect of something that has been, I don't even know. I don't actually know how you get to doing to deception. I can understand if you got the deception right on the first try, but even if you tried over and over again, doesn't that set the intention for you realizing that something didn't work and that you're trying something different that did work? That's how I would interpret it, but who am I? The deceiver is not necessarily smart and the deception not necessarily intended. To trick a system is to take advantage of its informal shortcomings. Finally, Artiga's shift of focus on the informational aspect does invalidate the intuition that deception must be beneficial to the deceiver, only lying consequently. The stable existence of this phenomenon in various fields might help us to tackle the intriguing and difficult issue where mind enters the scene. 2, why the failure exploited in deception is not necessarily a cognitive one. Okay? As much as I approve this general strategy, the more I want to present some thoughts on why tricking a system might not necessarily exploit a cognitive failure. As Artiga says himself, communication among plants is not fruitfully explained in cognitive terms. The sender emits some signal that typically triggers adaptive behavior in the receiver. This description is perfectly compatible with the fact that the exercise of this function can fail in some cases. The whitefly scenario presents such a case, I believe. The volatile organic compound signal triggers a salicylic acid defense response, which normally correlates with pathogens being present and has the function to do so, although there is no pathogen threat. If this is granted, then it is questionable why, in the successful case, where present pathogen cause salicylic acid production, which trigger in turn the correspondent protective volatile organic compound responses in a neighboring tomato, there is, as Artiga says, in such primitive communication, no cognitive element in play volatile organic, I don't know why he said volatile organic content there. Whereas in the dysfunctional case of the whitefly scenario, tricking the informed plant, the same tomato, should turn out to imply a perspective on the world. This seems ad hoc and unconvincing. Because the volatile organic compound receptor mechanism works the same in both cases, carrying information correlating with pathogen presence, why should it be contentful in the dysfunctional scenario? Therefore, the fact that the whitefly exploits this correlation between the plants for its own profit does not seem to change the nature of the receptor mechanism in the consumer plant or reveal it having been cognitive in the first place. Okay, so what's happening, it sounds like, and you in the comments let me know how you interpret this. It sounds like what is being said here is the fact that because regardless of whether or not there is a pathogen present, so a pathogen means I have some situation, something is happening that requires me to respond in a way that provides a receptor, something that can help soothe this pathogen, right? But it sounds like whether or not the pathogen is real or not, the plant is releasing the same compounds. And therefore, they're saying there is no cognition because there's no evaluation of whether or not this plant is being deceived. And so therefore, there's no cognition. It is a reaction to a series of chemicals being put out. I don't know. Given the fact that we as human beings have the expression, fool me once, shame on me, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, it implies that we get fooled quite a freaking much, and we're still considered cognitive, right? Let's keep reading to see if maybe I didn't get that completely right, but maybe. We'll see. Okay. In this respect, it could be the case that the failure implied a deception is not automatically a cognitive failure. The deceiver exploits a weak spot in how a mechanism is inflexibly wired. This wiring is what is deceived or tricked. So, if any primitive communicator can be tricked, the inflexible wiring can, but does not need to imply an inaccurate perspective on how things look. Because a correlation failure in an inflexible systems do not need to be the result of a cognitive state. It can rest on a state, the volatile organic compound signal in our case, that increases the probability of a non-actional, functionally relevant conditioning. And this is what frustrates me about all of these conversations, because what's frustrating to me about all of this is that the mentality is, because we can't read the mind, there is no mind. And therefore, everything that you're seeing is cause and effect. And we think we got into this conversation in the naturally conscious community this week when we were having a conversation about what was it that was very, very similar in that it was about the idea that we because we don't understand how the mechanism works, we imply that it is a kind of reactive mechanism. When instead, we're the ones that can't get into the mind of the plant, so we don't know what's happening. So why do we err on the side of, because we can't see the mind doesn't exist? What would it be like to err on the other side, which is, hey, we're seeing these behaviors that if we were going to see them in humans, we would think that is cognition, and therefore why? And we're not looking at the mechanistic approaches when we break. Oh, that was what we were talking about in NCC. When we get into the mechanistic approaches, they're all the freaking same. once we break things down to the fact that my body reacts through chemical receptors that do different things and muscles and pulls and all these aspects, when you look at it mechanistically, it's all the same. But when you look at it instead more holistically and as a biosystem, then you start to see where the cognition actually comes into play. So this argument of like, just because I don't see it, it doesn't exist, just seems so juvenile. Just seems juvenile. It just seems juvenile. Okay. So if this state is the result of a cognitive process or not is not answered by the mere existence of the agent being deceived. This is why deception is so ubiquitous in nature. The deceiver can have it cheaper below the cognition level. Allow me to illustrate this conclusion by the force of analogy. Think of a fire sprinkler system in buildings which are activated by a signal coming from smoke detectors. If I want to trick or deceive the sprinklers, for example, to cause damage or distraction, I can trigger a false smoke alarm using steam, which in turn sends a wrong signal to the sprinklers since there is no fire. The sprinklers will discharge water and cause damage. Tricking the system, deceiving the consumer, does not plausibly imply that the sprinkler is cognitive. To trick, I merely take advantage of the wiring and the correlation failure. It is equally plausible that the plant does not differ in that respect from the sprinkler. The plant seems to display sensitivity, not intentionality. If these explanations of deception capitalizing on wiring and correlation failure are illuminating and economically preferable, the conclusion from being deceived to having a cognitive state becomes much more disputable. Artiga presents himself such a deflationist, non-cognitive alternative of interpreting the deceived plant. I think his dialect style is really a strength of Artiga's argument. Why not regarding the deception here as merely triggering maladaptive behavior in other plants? This point can be illustrated with the sprinkler case, I think. As a reply, Artiga states that 1, plant-insect deception is widely recognized in the literature, and 2, that this kind of deception does not plausibly differ from the deception among plants. Artiga concludes from both premises that being deceived is best seen as cognitive, and to think otherwise, the burden of proof is to show that plant-plant deception differ from plant-animal deception. This conclusion seems problematic to me. So here we're saying that you're saying that in the sprinkler scenario, you have me, human, cognizant, and sprinkler, non-cognizant, and therefore, we were talking about artificial intelligence. Oh my goodness. Sorry, I just remembered what the conversation we were having. It was in the iSprouts gathering, monthly gathering, the interspecies sprouts monthly gathering that we have, this our networking event, our opportunity to get to know sprouts, and we were talking about artificial intelligence. I'm not even going to get down that rabbit hole, but the recording is in the Naturally Conscious community, so you can head over there and you can see it. Okay, so what he's saying is that if we're talking about one system is cognizant and the other is not, then because one can deceive the other does not mean that both have to be cognizant. And so this is, let's see where he's going. It looks question begging because it seems to contain a hidden premise that says that the deception, as it is recognized in the research, is in fact or must be understood cognitively. But the deflationist objection does just question this assumption. For this reason, the point of the objection is not to say that plant-plant deception is a special case that can be explained in non-cognitive terms, which would shift. Artiga is right, the burden of proof to the deflationist side indeed. But the point of the objection is rather to demand an argument why receiving volatile organic chemical molecules requires the agent to have a perspective on the world. That is the hot potato that is not touched here, and it is to be touched by the plant cognitivist. This shifts the burden of proof back to the plant cognitivist, since any functional system is vulnerable to be tricked because of the inflexible wiring and the correlational failure. It is up to the plant cognitivist to present a further argument that is missing here to show A, why reacting to an unreliable signal is a cognitive failure. Think of our fire sprinklers. B, why our systematic non-cognitivistic intuitions and explanations about simple sensory mechanisms in plants, most insects, and artificial detector systems are actually wrong ignorant, or ad hoc? C, what would we do? What would we gain explanatorily when we refer to what a plant might have in mind beyond mere sensitivity in leaves and roots? How our predictive power is improved when we take an intentional stance. I hate C. What do we gain when we refer to a plant as having mind beyond mere sensitivity? Maybe the recognition of a being who has intelligence and not looking at such a being as an object to be manipulated. I think the question you want to ask is it worthwhile? Wait for it. Is it worthwhile for me to recognize the mind? Or is the amount that I as a human being lose when I get thrown off of my pedestal so great that I will do everything in my power not to recognize it? That's what I'm thinking. So, at least from a legal point of view, the one who raises such claims bears the burden of proof. So I think it's up to the plant cognitivists to define what makes a state cognitive in the first place. I think this further element added to the positive part could help to increase the force of the theory. 3, the role of cognitive representational states, an objectivist proposal. To conclude, I want to offer now at least one suggestion of what cognitive could mean in a broad representational sense of the term that does not support plant cognitivism in the discussed example. For a philosopher, the peculiar point of intentionality is not primarily the statistical or causal connection with the environment. Any state displays this. It is aboutness, directedness, having an objectivity. I'm assuming that object, you mean like a goal, objectivity. And this is not primarily a practical or biological matter. So 2 features emerge here are about something, an object, subject matter, as being a certain way, attribution, and are specifics and characterizes the environment as being a certain way. This combination of objecthood and attribution is more than just a result of a functional correlation between A causing B. Representational reductionism or deflationism, spelling out aboutness in terms of functional information is surely a necessary element in explaining content, but not sufficient. Since successful reductionism has to capture the whole phenomenon, but it does not capture objecthood and specification. It does not capture the gist of intentionality, I believe. An attribute such as, for example, having a cubic shape or being a table does not operate as a generalizer of a very different input information that underdetermine the distal condition. This is epistemic, epistemic function. God, I hate that word sometimes. And the representation hungry problem for a categorization and attribution. A system that is capable of attributing cubic shaped to objects can attribute it at least to a variety of different instances or versions of cubic shaped things in different contexts, distances, sizes, and viewing angles. The same with identifying tables or applying linguistic elements across a huge range of different contexts and versions. This contextualization capacity is where a category or attribute has its genuine place. It is because of this complex variety that miscategorization, inaccuracy can occur as a genuine systemic cognitive failure of the system itself. It is the cause of the correlation failure. The generalizer objectifies the idiosyncratic and contextual variety of form to form a common tendency towards a constant object that presents itself under a specifying aspect marked by such an invariant element. The object aspect structure is what any perspective and its contents consist of. If a plant system does not face the informational variety one and the same external condition can cause in the system's input or the ambiguity one input present, there is no explanatory purchase to call the system's achievement cognizant or cognitive or perceptual. A volatile organic chemical receiver is activated by a highly specific proximal effect. There is no pressure for a system to... I have to stop. I have to stop because as I'm going through this, besides the fact that I hate the way these people write, I'm convinced they just write because they want to be as ambiguous as possible. But besides that, here's the part that's pissing me off about this. There's twofold. I have twofold problems with all of this. One is going back to what he had said earlier in reference to law. In law settings, right, when any kind of suit is brought up, any kind, whether it's criminal or civil, there is a clear understanding once the law is created of who has the burden of proof. So if you are talking about defamation, for example, the burden of proof is on the side of what I said was not defamation. So if I bring suit against somebody for defamation, it is not for me to show that you defamed me. I mean, I have to show that you did it with the sense that you put it out there, but I don't have to prove. It's you that has to prove to me that what you said was true and therefore not defamation. Because if it's true, it can't be defamation. So, or in the criminal justice system, the burden of proof is on the prosecution. It's not on the defense. The prosecution indicts and has the burden of proof of whether or not this person did it, not the opposite way around. So here's the thing that I think could change this entire conversation. Where is the burden of proof? If we think about it in relation to something that exists today, food, right? When I think about food, because I was thinking about plants, I was thinking about food, which is, of course, one of the big fears that many have because we manipulate plants in whatever way we want in the name of food. But if we think about plants from the perspective of food, right? If I go to a supermarket and I pick up something, anything, right? And it's just labeled as pasta, it is my understanding that that is not organic. In order for it to be organic pasta in today's world, whether right or wrong, and that's another debate, it is not thought of that that could be organic pasta and not labeled such. It might even be, but that's not the case. That's not what I'm seeing. So in this case, and in the case in general, when it comes to plant, I think one of the interesting debates for us to have that I don't see anybody having is who bears the burden of proof? Right now, given the fact that the world has grown up with the idea that plants are not intelligent or cognizant or all these things from a general mainstream perspective, what is being, it sounds like, said is, if you want me to recognize plants as intelligent, you've got to prove it to me. The problem is that when you look at even legal precedents, which is if there is even an inclination that harm is being done, you have to side with who might be hurt, then isn't it actually the opposite? Like, isn't the burden of proof of human neurobiology to prove that plants are not intelligent, conscious and cognizant rather than the other way around? I mean, are we really looking at the problem wrong in order to excuse our ability to hurt plants? Wouldn't it be smarter from the plant perspective and the plant advocacy perspective if we argued the opposite, which is, I don't have to prove to you that plants are cognizant because the fact that they breathe and are alive and can be killed is inherently giving them intelligence, consciousness, cognizance, and all of the above. And therefore, if you want me to remove their rights, you have to prove to me that they don't deserve them How different would the world be if we were to go into this direction? How different would it be if we were to look at animal sentience and plant sentience as that all exists? And it's up to us humans to learn how to communicate, because they all communicate amongst each other, can communicate amongst each other. You put any type of animal out there, any kinds of animal and plant combination, we know, even from the mechanistic biology and science, that they are communicating, that can communicate across species lines. It's only us. We don't hear it. And we use arguments that we don't use even amongst ourselves. Because if you cut me, I might not even know. I don't even know if I'm sick. I don't know if there's a pathogen in me. Therefore, I'm not responding because I don't know. It just seems like our arguments are backwards. Like we're forcing ourselves as into the corner of having to put up arms and like fight our way out of this discussion around intelligence and cognizance and consciousness, when instead the burden of proof should be prove that I'm not cognizant, because isn't that what we do with human beings? So we hold ourselves to a different standard. As a human being, if I go into a court of law, I have to prove when I'm not cognizant, when I am not fit for trial, for example. Otherwise, even if I seem like I'm not, it's not accepted as an argument. So why don't we extend that same courtesy to everybody else? Why don't we just assume that everybody is intelligent and cognizant? And play that out for a second. How would the world change? Ooh, this might be a very interesting budding artistry. Hold on, folks. Hold on. I got to make myself notes. Where is my, here it is. Sorry, I now just gave myself an idea for a super cool budding artistry session. For those of you that don't know, budding artistry is something we do once a month in the Naturally Conscious community, inside the Sprouts Writing and Creativity group. In this group, we meet every week and we do mostly writing. So we have twice a month, we do writing from prompts, no critique, no feedback. But once a month, we do something called budding artistry. And in the budding artistry, we explore some topic or some concept or something through the use of the other arts. So instead of just focusing on writing, a lot of drawing, a lot of experimentation. So this would be a really interesting thing too. So I'm making myself a note, budding artistry, because I think this is going to be cool. Budding artistry to explore plants. Oh. We're going to play a little bit of devil's advocate in this. Okay, thanks for the patience. I should always have my paper and my stuff ready because I know ideas come to me as I'm doing this, but let's keep going because we've got a lot to go. If a plant system does not face the informational variety one of the same external conditions can cause in the system's input or the ambiguity, one input present, there's no explanatory purchase to call the system's achievement cognitive or perceptual. A volatile organic compound receiver is activated by a highly specific proximal effect. There's no pressure for a system to transcend that effect in an objectifying way. There's no perspective needed that models or pictures an environmental condition as such beyond the latter's subjective and variant effect on the sensory receptors. Oh, and that was the other point. Sorry, I'm going to keep going off on tangents. Here's my other tangent. All receptors were created to receive something. If we do not believe plants are cognizant in any way, even minimal basal cognition, okay? It's just for argument's sake for a second. We'll just go with minimal basal cognition. Why did the plant create the sensor in the first place? In other words, in the case of the sprinkler, the building didn't create the sprinkler. The building didn't set an intention for knowing, hey, I have to know whether or not there's going to be a fire, so I'm going to create a sensor. The human created the sensor that was put on the building. But in the case of a plant, similar to ourselves, we created the sensor. The plant created the sensor. The plant, at some point, said, quotes, air quotes, to key self, I need to know when that's happening. So I'm going to create a sensor. So doesn't the fact that the plant created or evolved this sensor, by definition, make the plant cognizant, because it was only the plant that could choose and know that this sensor was needed? Because if not, the plant wouldn't waste the energy creating the sensor in the first place. So riddle me that, Batman. Where does that come in? The fact that the plant created the sensor, not an external system, but the plant. So the plant knew that if they created this system, that if Key created this system, Key could use that sensor to determine something that can then have an effect. What about that? Why is nobody talking about that? Maybe it's too simplistic. Maybe I'm simplistic, but it seems like that would be something to think about. I want to hear your thoughts. I want, leave me a comment. I'm so curious as to what you think about that. Okay. The information in the VOC receptor. Oh, this is the end. The information in the VOC receptor does not need to be objectified. No object is constructed that stands in for an environmental condition in the robust sense. Standing in or representing implies. There is no representational information generated that engages in specifying a condition that is sensorily underdetermined by sensitivity. Thinking of how the environment looks to the plant is explanatory idle. But no, if not, the plant wouldn't have created the sensor to begin with. I disagree with you. Defining cognitive or representational in this more restrictive fashion, we can combine an empirical specification of a kind of complexity that fits the characteristic objectivity property of aboutness states with clear explanatory purchase. No. It's a reductionist. No. I do not like. No. I feel like it's so trying to simplify something that's so not simple. And I still think those two pieces. One, why is the burden on the plant to prove that the plant is cognizant? Why do we not extend the courtesy that everything alive is cognizant, and therefore it is up to us humans to prove that they're not, which I don't think you can do, because once the tables are turned, the human neurobiology world and all of the philosophical world and everything else is going to run into the exact same problems that the current plant world is running into, which is you can't prove this shit. You just can't. So you just have to be like humans and just accept it. We don't know how the hell consciousness works, but we accept that we're conscious. Only because we can talk amongst ourselves. It's pretty much it. So I don't like this. No, I don't like it. So I want to hear your thoughts. Leave me a comment in the chat. Let me know what you think. I'm very, 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 very curious. Okay. This next one, which ties in, I'm very curious as to how this person is going to, what direction they're going to take on this, because this is also, I'm not 100% sure exactly what it is, because I couldn't find where exactly even it was published, other than the fact that it was published. And this is a student of CIIS, the California Institute of Integral Studies. I think that's what it's called, which also often has some very interesting thinking, because CIIS has a PhD program that's quite extensive. and very eclectic in a lot of ways. So this is Elizabeth MacLeod, who talks about plant neurobiology can prove plant consciousness. So here we're going on the opposite side of what we just read. So, and Jill makes the comment, it seems on both sides, an invisible ally that works for humans and plants that we don't recognize yet, but alive, is bigger than we know, but willing to be unknown. And I think that this is probably, to be honest, the fear that neurobiologists have. I think that neurobiologists think, like human neurobiologists think, that if we start to accept some of these things, we've got to go in this direction, which is the idea that there is more, that it's not just a human-centric, science. The scientific world is just about like proving human superiority and that the only thing that exists is humans. And therefore atheism, it's kind of like the discussion, so many of these discussions that end up happening end up being discussions on sort of religious studies, not just discussions on the science itself. And I think that that's exactly what many people are trying to avoid. So, but let's see what Elizabeth MacLeod, like again, she's from CIIS. This is not a traditional type of paper. It seems to be some kind of cohort paper that was written. And so I'm curious as to how she thinks that plant neurobiology can prove plant consciousness. If the neurobiology of a plant can be proven with cognition-like quasi-brain response in its reactions to the environment, then a behavioral self-awareness or consciousness is beyond plausible. Just the opposite of exactly what we just read in our previous paper. I love the contrast. That's what I love about doing this, the contrast. And therefore, just like other animate beings, inherent in a plant's existence is a sense of agency, which is exactly what I was saying. Our job is to acknowledge this and preserve plant dignity. And this right here goes to what my little rant that I was saying. I have like no little music or anything fun like that. Anyway, my little rant that I was just saying, which is, maybe we're looking at this all wrong. Rather than trying to prove the plants are conscious, maybe we should just accept the plants are conscious and let the human neurobiologists try to prove that they're not. Dignity acknowledges divinity. And going to Jill's comment, boom, divinity acknowledges dignity. And this is, I think, the fear of human neurobiologists. We don't want to bring divinity into this. We don't want to bring any kind of cosmic force into this. We don't want this to be there. I am so curious as to where she's going to go with this. Okay, introduction essay. The suppression of uncomfortable ideas may be common in religion or in politics, but it is not the path to knowledge, and there is no place for it in the endeavor of science. Yeah? You go tell that to all the human neurobiologists and plant physiologists that we have reviewed papers on, because that seems exactly where we are. The suppression of uncomfortable ideas. Consciousness is dependent on sentience. What are the criteria for the state of being sentient? It has been defined as the basic ability of organisms to perceive and therefore respond to selected features of their environments, thus making them conscious or aware of those features. If a being is sentient, does that mean that being is divine? I think Jill's going to enjoy this conversation. If divinity, wait, where am I? Sorry, I moved stuff forward. I got excited. If divinity includes why are you? Oh no, you do this thing. Hold on a second. Hold on, folks. I have a problem. There's two ways to make this large. Oh, I put the wrong one. That was my fault. Because that one jumps. Ooh, but I like this. I like that it's nice and big. Okay. If a being is sentient, let's see, can I do this? Hold on. No, I don't want that. I want this. There we go. If a being is sentient, does that mean that being is divine? If divinity includes everything everywhere, can we also say that everything everywhere deserves the dignity of human acknowledgement? Little did I know she was going to go into the exact argument that I was just talking about in the previous paper. Why is there such a discrepancy between treatment of human life and treatment of all other forms of life? What if true equality for all included plant life as well as animal life justice? Yes. Yes. Exactly. Consciousness, planet. Exactly. 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 Okay. Let's see where Elizabeth, because it would be great if she could scientifically bring this, although I still think like her, it just is. We don't have to argue about this. There is a great debate in the scientific community creating tidal waves in our usual thought patterns. It is similar in scale to the great debate of the 70s, spearheaded by Carl Sagan, addressing Are we alone in the universe? It is the exciting idea of plant life agency. The idea of plant agency surfaced with vigor in the 1960s. It was largely based on one man's work, Cleve Baxter, an interrogation specialist with the CIA who stumbled on an astonishing find in February of 1966. Now, for those of you that don't know Baxter, I'm sure she's going to go into this, but Baxter was the main protagonist of The Secret Life of Plants, which caused the flurry of positivity as well as negativity. But let's see where she goes, and then I'll fill in the gaps. I actually have a polygraph that I used with plants. I do. Cleve Baxter, let's see. Baxter used a polygraph to measure plant response to emotional stimulus. When threatened with fire, the plant responded and the machine recorded the change in status. When the tester thought about harming the plant with fire, the plant responded the same as the actual threat. After repeatable results, Baxter professed that plants possessed primary perception. Actually wrote a book on this. He wrote a book called Primary Perception that was taught for a while until it was somewhat discredited, which is a shame. I actually met his French translator who had been friends with him up until the end of his life. And he suffered. He suffered at the end. It was such a shame because he was such a pioneer, and yet he suffered a lot. Today, a leading researcher and award-winning author, Stephen Harold Booner, who unfortunately passed last year, I believe. I have some of his books and had known him through other people, has written volumes of text exploring the interspecies communication and interactions in the context of life and survival on the Earth. He states, the Earth is a living organism that is highly intelligent, that's existed for 4 billion years or so. Nothing is generated except to fulfill a specific ecological function. Nature has one goal, to evolve to fill these functions. There have always been and continue to be innumerable ways plants help humans, providing sustenance, medicine, environmental protection, inspiration, and companionship. Thanks, everyone. The discussion happening now in the global botany community is, can we call something that considers sensory input and acts according to this input a sentient being with behavior? The term behavior, by definition, indicates a decision-making process that is, oh my goodness, can I tell you how many arguments I've had with certain types of scientists every time I bring up the word decision-making? That trips them up. The fact that plants take an input, compare that input against their memory of what that input means, then compare that memory of the specific input with what's happening today, and then make a decision on it, like choose something, and that is decision making, freaks out scientists, freaks them out. The term observable activity of an organism, anything an organism does that involves action and or response to stimulation. This can be tested with human created criteria. Varied popular authors like Michael Pollan to scholarly academic writers like Anil Anathashwami. I think that's, Anathashwami. Everybody knows here that I try to pronounce them and then I just call them by whatever I can. In this case, Anil. Stephen Booner, Francisco Garzón, and which is really Paco Calvo, by the way. His name is Francisco Garzón, Calvo Garzón, and she just doesn't know that the nomenclature in Spain means that's Paco Calvo, are all weighing in on the subject. Some have turned their attention to the heated debate of plant neurobiology. Some are plant neurobiologists. Plant neurobiology is specifically described as the sensing and learning behaviors of plants with central processors. Now, by the way, this reference, which is not Garzón, it's Calvo. Anyway, Calvo, Paco Calvo, Actually, we reviewed all of the original manifesto for plant neurobiology when the field was originally formed. So you can go back through the commentary, as I said earlier, right? You can go through the commentary, which is all found, on my website, and you can go back and look through all of these different papers, because she's referring to ones that we've pretty much looked at completely. Hold on. I just did something dumb. Okay, sorry. Researchers have acquired considerable valid empirical data, and yet there are still critics. This seems to show that this debate is fueled by human positionality of the top of the food chain intelligence bias, and is not driven by lack of evidence. Which, again, if you just rewind, if you just jumped on this stream right now, rewind about 10 minutes, and you will get to exactly the example of this top of the food chain intelligence, and my rant about it, because we just went through a paper that exactly talks about that. The debate on plant intelligence is unfortunately plagued with conceptual traps. Intelligence is usually cashed out in animal or anthropocentric terms, which is what I started talking about. The fact is, when we talk about cognition, the tests that measure cognition are all based on animal behavior, and therefore cannot be easily adapted to plants. In such ways that plants plainly fail to meet the conditions for animal or human-like intelligence for obvious but uninteresting reasons. Yes, this seems a similar stance as when our solar system was considered to be geocentric. Because it was such a significant shift in thinking at the time, non-believers persisted despite the mountain of data presented. Humans are built to easily see within the framework that is familiar. We are conditioned beings. Very conditioned beings. Very conditioned beings. We like patterns. Patterns are good. Patterns are none. Our brains are hardwired to recreate a comfortable reality. It requires effort, a certain openness, personal vigilance, and bravery to learn to think along new lines that contrast with a lifetime of thinking habits. Hence, why it is so hard to break out of our conditioning and limiting beliefs. And this is the reason why working with plants is so good, and makes it so much easier for us to step out of our conditioning and our limiting beliefs, because it breaks those norms. It breaks that paradigm, and it gives us a brand new paradigm that we have to co-create with plants, because that language doesn't exist. Something like what inspirational internet blogger G. Jobel C says: don't be afraid of your fears. They're not there to scare you. They're there to let you know that something is worth it. As a very quick aside, I am currently working on an updated version of my Befriends Your Limiting Beliefs webinar, which is going to be amazing, because it takes everything we have learned from the plants and the fact that our limiting beliefs are not there to scare us, but to protect us, and takes it to the nth degree. So just keep an eye out for that, because it's going to be announcing soon. And it's so good. So good. So good. It is doubly difficult. It is a doubly difficult challenge going against the grain of the collective cultural construct. We do it all the time. Anthropology can show us that humans assemble themselves into groups based on common thinking. In human evolution, Neanderthals were definitely replaced by Cro-Magnons, because Cro-Magnon man probably had large tribal groupings, as opposed to the Neanderthals' small ones. Also, it turns out that Neanderthals were a lot more spiritual, and therefore a little bit more pacifists, where Cro-Magnons were not as spiritual, and therefore way more aggressive and not afraid to wage war, where Neanderthals were more about peace and love and peace and love. So you take that wherever you need to take that. So it follows, if you were a minority dissident, you might not be adequately protected from harm, or you might not be able to share the harvest. Unless these divergent individuals were exalted in their society, those who did not conform, at least to a certain degree, did not survive. I would have never survived. Just wouldn't have. Just wouldn't have. I feel more Neanderthal anyway. I always have. But that's another conversation which we can have someday. From the view of Darwinian evolution, a community whose members are prepared to support one another and to sacrifice themselves for the common good have a better chance for survival. Hence why I live at Domino. That's, yeah, there you go. There are more steps along this line of thinking. What if there were particular criteria that humans have no basis to detect? It's what I was just saying, why the burden of proof needs to shift. We need to prove that plants are not intelligent rather than the other way around. We are guilty as a species of only considering our sensory base, when plants have a much more expansive sensory base, and therefore we as humans most likely have a much more expansive sensory base. This rigidity dictates that a being without a centralized brain could not assimilate information, and yet it is happening and is measurable. When we use a measuring tape, we are using a system of numbers that is human invented. What are the birds using? And further, how are they storing it in memory? To be stored in memory, the measurements have to be encoded in some form, and that form has to be internal, has to have an internal consistency to it. In other words, it has to possess the same kind of structural integrity as our system of mathematical measurements. There is so much more that we know. I believe this is the cornerstone of the critical establishment. To see all sides, one must acknowledge the unknown. This is a difficult task for the established colonized scientific community. This is a community of people who round up to the nearest digit. This is a community of people that speak easily of statistical margin of error with the collateral loss that creates. This is a community that seems to have placed an intermediary or liaison between themselves and direct knowledge, like the way evidence is emboldened in a limited set of criteria based in only a few sensory modalities. We do this at every freaking level. We do it at every level. We do it at level personally, like for most religions, there's some intermediary that you don't dialogue direct to God. You got to go to the pastor or other things. But we do it in every aspect, even our own bodies. We have to go through a doctor to understand our own bodies. We constantly put intermediaries to understand plants. You have to go through scientists, or we do not trust our senses. We do not have connection and contact with all of our senses so that we can make decisions based on what we know from the inside out. This fulfills the need for a liaison between oneself and direct knowledge. This hierarchical colonial construct places a government bureau or institutionally funded study as authoritative knowledge, eclipsing and delegitimizing the sense of other knowledge, supporting our self-supporting autocracy. That's why I like going through these papers with you, because we can talk about this in a broad range. So yes, we're using the paper, but we are using our complete interpretation, which includes our humanness, because we are humanness, our plantness, because we are in this world working with plants and we're reawakening our plantness from within, our animalness, because we are animals, but also all these other senses that we're starting to bring online, and our divineness and our artisticness and our creativeness, all these different aspects. We're reading these papers, trying to expand the way that we experience and trying to take in the essence of what the conversation is, putting it into a new paradigm frame and seeing, does it hold water? Or does it stimulate me to think about something in a different way? So the reality of the debate is not about whether plants communicate. That has already been proven with concrete data sources like the Cleve Baxter. It's been proven with lots of other ones. I love Cleve Baxter, don't get me wrong, but you could have sourced something else there to really make your argument better. It's already been proven with concrete data sources like Monica Galliano and Christian Zick, and with Paco Calvo, and with Miguel Segun. There's a lot of them. And the plant consciousness debate remains outside any institutionalized pharmacological study. Perhaps there is a larger picture at play here in this microcosm. Joseph Campbell said, a hero is someone who has given his or her life to something bigger than oneself. So this question of whether plant life is worthy of human acknowledgement, dignity, is essentially a basic existential question. Can humans get comfortable with the unknown and rise above societal norms? I'm going to throw you a different one that I actually think it's an even more existential question. When it comes to whether plant life is worthy of human acknowledgement, the question really is, can humans get comfortable with the concept that we might have to kill beings that we know are intelligent, that we might have to also modify our practices in order to not kill as many of these beings because they are intelligent, cognizant beings, or that we might have to even deny ourselves things that we have become accustomed to because we do not feel that it is worthy to kill a being in order for us to have that thing. Riddle me that. Can you get comfortable with that? Can you be comfortable with not buying furniture that you throw away every 2 years, or that one move and the whole thing disintegrates, but then instead you buy things like this piece back here that's probably been there for like 100 years? Can you do that? These are the questions. These are really the really uncomfortable questions. Society today does not make an allowance for the unknown to be comfortable. That's true. We like safety and security. Our protector controller personality is like, security, no vulnerabilities here. I've got no vulnerability. And if you try to point out one of my vulnerabilities, I am going to fight you tooth and nail. I have no vulnerabilities. Until the othered voices are considered heroic, we will remain in debate. Racial bias, cultural differences, gender roles, and whether you are a believer or not are just a few of the ways we divide amongst ourselves and continue the status quo of strata. Plant communication is somehow still not a baseline consideration, even though plant speaking to plant has abundant proof. According to Peter Wolleben, the Swiss Federal Institute of Forests. Oh, she's listing things because I was like, Peter Wolleben is German. Snow and landscape research has field research that reveals that trees scream when thirsty. Scientists recorded the sounds of this and how they explain them. Vibrations occur in the trunk when the flow of water from the roots to the leaves is interrupted. And goes on to say that if we were to examine, I think that's examine, not examining, how humans produce sound, what we would see wouldn't be that different. And this is what I was talking about before, that I was saying how we reduce plants to mechanistic behaviors and use that to discount the way a plant behaves. But for humans, we remain one step before that so that we cannot compare ourselves to that. Mm, mm. We're building bridges to known that we need to accept. We're building those bridges to new things, to new levels of knowledge and acceptance that are going to completely shift our paradigms. The passage of air down the windpipe causes our vocal cords to vibrate. Exactly the same things happening in plants. This allows the other trees in proximity to conserve water in a particular way when this is occurring, even if they are not vibrating or experiencing the thirst directly. Plant-to-animal cooperation and communication is proven by the simple fact of pollination. Oh man, there's so many more ways. Pollination, the way the herbivory, there's so many different ways. Ants protecting different kinds of cacti. I mean, it's all over the place. Even with all the substantiation, plant-to-human communication is still considered fringe. We're fringe, folks, all of us plant communicators. I'm actually teaching a class later, and I'm going to take them through plant communication. And that last point is where my interest lies and can be the very basis for human acknowledgement of plant dignity. When plants become widely accepted as having consciousness, humanity must regard themselves in a different way entirely. Are the indoctrinated non-believers afraid of change and the unknown? This is more the crux, as it takes faith to know we cannot know everything, that what we've been told with old school science is finite. A new awareness is peeling away like onion layers and also implies responsibility of existence on a level not yet taken by humanity on a large scale normative. There are many ways humans disassociate themselves in order to act with impunity. Some shifts are subtle and can occur with time and repetition. This one of a whole paradigm shift. Come to the naturally conscious community. We're accelerating this there. Is a 2x4 to the forehead and changes everything in one instant. One cannot unknow when one suddenly knows. With the conclusion of this debate, this disassociation will no longer be possible. With this realization, many wrongs will need to be righted. The trauma we've all been experiencing will cease. We won't be able to continue it. It is absolutely unfathomable amount of effort that will be required, and it is impossible and inevitable all at once. I believe this to be the pivotal debate of humanity right now, as it will fundamentally change how humans regard themselves in their environment forever. Preach, preach, preach. Things are changing, and the aware among us are noticing. Florianne Koechlin, one of the members of the Swiss Federal Ethics Committee on Non-Human Biotechnology, ruled that in 2008, legally, plants have dignity. It's one of only two rulings of that kind really in the world. Ecuador is the other one that's put it into their constitution. She asks, are we morally obligated to appreciate plants for their own sake, regardless of what they do for us? Now, I want you to contrast that to what we were just reading before, right? If you just got here, go back. What we were reading before, that was going into big detail about, is it worth it to recognize plants? Because what's in it for us, right? That's what dear old Adrian was saying. What's in it for us? Where instead, she very correctly flips the discussion. Are we morally obligated to appreciate plants for kin's own sake? For kin's own sake, regardless of what they do for us. Plant rights are the rights that plants are entitled to. Such issues are often raised in connection with discussions about human concerns and rights, animal rights, or even biocentrism. And her answer is yes. Mind you, it is scary. Let's not even pretend. We don't actually understand all the implications of this, but it still needs to be done. The wounds in the world are reflected within us, or did those outer wounds begin long ago when we locked a part of ourselves away? Who can say just where the reclamation of the world begins? This is why I keep saying we need to reawaken our plantness. I mean, these are all her annotations. The interesting thing, I actually want to go through some of these annotations. These are her resources and the works that she cited. Some of them are books that we know, right? Like The Secret Teaching of Plants, which is one of Stephen Harrow Booner's books. Oh, there it is. The Sacred Plant Medicine is the second one. Plant Intelligence, another book. Here it is, Francisco Calvo Garzón. It's actually Calvo is his last name, so she got it wrong. That's why I said it. This is Paco Calvo, which we've gone through much of this article. Carol Gouillet is really interesting that she mentions Gouillet. So Gouillet, where the heck is Gouillet's book? I think it's in my room. I was looking to see if I had it here. So Carol Gouillet's book, Sacred Plant Initiations, is a very interesting book. Gouillet came to Dahmen several years ago. Her, and at the time, her kind of business partner, who is Pam Montgomery, who is Gouillet's in Ireland. Montgomery is in Vermont, I want to say, in the United States. And they do a lot of plant initiations and such. And Gouillet was just working on this book when she came. That's why I said I have the book somewhere, because she gifted it to me. It's somewhere to find it. But Gouillet is a great person and very interesting. She has beautiful land in Ireland and does plant initiations and apprenticeships and such. Very, very interesting. Michael Hall, which we've gone through. Pam McGovery, as I was talking about, which is her book is a little older. She also has a newer book. I think she put out a second one. Michael Collin, which The Intelligent Plant in the New Yorker, we actually went through. So if you go back through Plant Consciousness Commentary, you will find that. Scarborough, VL, does water have, this is a water thing. That's why I'm like, I don't know who that is. Chihuahuas, which we've talked about multiple times and we've cited in many, many, many papers. Peter Wolleben, The Hidden Lives of Trees, which we've read in the Plant Wisdom Plant Book Club. Sorry, blanked for a second. So if you are if you've been looking for a place where you can read and comment and have conversations about many of these plant-inspired books, please come to the Plant Wisdom Book Club. You'll find it on my website. We do some amazing, really, really great conversations in there about our books. We're currently reading Emily Dickinson's Gardening Life by Marta McDowell. I have to say I was skeptical, and I still am a little bit skeptical, but our first discussion really changed the way that I think about the book. Here are some of Cleve Baxter's different works. Primary Perception is probably the one that is much more interesting, whereas everybody talks about, The Secret Life of Plants, but it's not. The Philosophy of Plant Neurobiology is the manifesto, is in Plant Consciousness Commentary. So you're welcome to go through it and read it there. It's we went through it line by line and had a really interesting conversation about it. So Danielson, this is about plant health clinics. I actually don't know this one. Dossie, Being Green, on the relationship between people and plants. I might have to go look that one up. Super curious. What is behavior? We have talked about it in other ones. And a lot of these now are moving away from, oh my goodness. She actually cites Genotics, which is a great company and a great kind of paper. This is a really interesting one. I love it. Robin Wall Kimmerer, Braiding Sweetgrass, we read in the Plant Wisdom Book Club. Definitely something to read. And there are several, and Mancuso, The Roots of Plant Intelligence, who was my professor when I did, I studied under him for my master's degree. So anyways, I just thought it was fun to go through these because a lot of these are in the the Plant Consciousness Commentary that we've gone through. And here she just talks about other things that you can read and such to get into it. So that was quick. That was way quicker than I thought it was going to be. I thought this was going to take a lot longer. I expected it to go a lot fast. But she has pictures in here, and that's really what I've been trying to get to. Hold on, let me see if I can get to them faster. Because, she talks about all of these relationships, which is interesting. Trends in plant science, which we've gone through. But I think what's really interesting is here. She copies the actual pages. Hold on, let me make myself smaller so that I don't know if I can move myself. All right, hold on. I'm just gonna, yeah. So she goes through and she literally puts images of the articles that she pulls from. Isn't that cool? The Roots of Consciousness. For example, here's the article and she highlighted them. Old school, so old school. And here is the, where is it? The quest. Oh, let me make it smaller. I just realized that I have it very big. The Quest for Cognition in Plants. Many of these, again, we've gone through. So you can just kind of look through the Plant Consciousness Commentary, the older ones, and you can see it's Sacred Plant Initiations. That's Gouillet's book, which I have somewhere, and mine's signed because Carol signed it for me. So anyways, I just think this is really fun. As always, I will put the links in the show notes when I, publish everything so that you have them here and you can go back and look at this if you want. Also, Boer's books I have somewhere. Some of them I have in hard copy, but many of them I also have as digital copies. So this is just a really fun piece that she included all the different pictures, man, plant. I don't like the fact that it says man, but whatever. We'll permit you, Marcel Vogel, for the second, that it has man, plant, and who knows, and spiritual ecology and such. So just fun. Just fun. Anyway, so this is what Elizabeth MacLeod is trying to say, that we can prove plant consciousness already. And this goes to exactly the conversation that I was having when we were doing our first paper, which is, it's crazy that we keep thinking that we have to prove it perfectly before we can acknowledge it. I think this is the reason why the debate on plant rights is becoming much greater, and you're starting to see plant and animal rights conversations come up more often, and more conferences on this topic, because it's getting to the point where it's impossible for us to recognize, at a minimum, the sentience and the intelligence of plants. Let's not even get into full consciousness, and therefore rights change. And I am sad in some ways that this is going to become a legal argument before it is a moral, ethical argument. But if it is the legal standards that push us into a new form of of ethics, then I think that that's fair. And that's the way it's going to have to be. So it's all we can do for right now is to look at it that way. So I'm going to be really curious. By this point, we're heading into 2022. So remember, I always talk about how I've been going in kind of chronological order. So you are going to see much more controversial papers coming forward. There is more conferences on plant communication. There is a lot more discussion. There's a lot more study, and that's where we're going to be. I'm also publishing a lot more of these inside the naturally conscious community, because we're having way more discussions on how this affects our day-to-day life, because this isn't just a theoretical conversation, right? This is about, once we recognize plants as the sentient, intelligent beings, then how do we move into a new level of co-creation? But more importantly, also, well, not more importantly, differently, also important is, who do we become as human beings when we recognize plants as being able to having evolved different aspects of themselves? And therefore, what about me? Are there other aspects of me that I have evolved, or that I have not evolved, or I don't recognize, that reawakening my plantness can really change in the way that I experience life? So this is really a conversation that is much more about just the philosophical musings of whether or not plants are intelligent, or even the political conversation of what changes to my food production and my furniture production and all kinds of production when I recognize plants as intelligent. But it's also a question of, when I recognize the sentience, the intelligence, and the consciousness of plants, and I recognize that plantness, what happens to me as a human being when I recognize that I have animalness as well as plantness? Because I evolved from plants, right? We have a less common ancestor with plants. And so therefore, there is an evolution, a part of them that we have within ourselves. So what changes in me, and how can that help me become a more complete human being? How does this help me become the true human being that I am meant to be, my full self, with all of my faculties turned on? And I think that this is the most exciting conversation that we can have. And these are the conversations we're having in the naturally conscious community every day, with all of our events and our activities and our different calls and our all our different programs, but as well as in the posts and such. So I invite you to come over to the naturally conscious community and to, join that conversation. Like, let us know your thoughts. What are you thinking about this? So I think that covers everything for today. It is Friday. I would like to say that I'm about to go, kick off my shoes and rest, but that's not true, because I still have one more class to teach. But I'm excited. I am going to teach a new generation of people how to communicate with plants. And so this is going to be fun. And then I will rest. And I hope that you have a wonderful weekend. Remember to resist the urge to hold back your evolving green brilliance, and take advantage of all the amazing things around you. Go off and spend some time with the plant now. All right. So this is me, Tigrea Gardenia. It's been an absolute pleasure, but now I'm out. Bye.